Shattered. That's the only fitting word, isn't it? That instant when everything simply crumbled and you remained there later feeling as though you weren't even worth sticking around for. As if somehow, without intending to, you turned out to be too intense yet insufficient all at once. So you took the step no one admits is truly courageous. You walked away. You granted them distance. You quit initiating messages. You quit monitoring their online status. You handed them the precise quiet they continually insisted they desired. And here is the realization that will make your heart sink just a bit. They never truly received that distance. Never. Not in reality. Because right at this moment, while you are over here attempting to mend, trying to push forward, trying to persuade your own mind that you're okay, they are observing you through a burner page, through a profile lacking a display picture and holding barely 3 followers, perhaps some distant relative's abandoned login. They resurrected it merely to monitor your life entirely under your radar. That is what we are diving into right now. And I assure you, by the moment we wrap up, you will comprehend precisely why this occurred, why they forced you to feel so discarded initially, and why, at this specific moment, they absolutely cannot stop staring. All right, let us just pause on this for a brief moment, since I realize several among you are currently nodding, and some are already noticing that heavy pressure forming inside your chest. Perhaps it struck you on a casual Thursday. You were simply brewing your tea, staying out of trouble, when suddenly your screen lights up with an alert from some user you cannot identify. A fresh follower, entirely faceless, or carrying a stolen image. A username packed with meaningless digits, and something deep inside your stomach instantly knows. You lack any hard evidence thus far, yet your nervous system already registers it before your logic can even process it. That is not paranoia. That is not you acting hysterical. That is simply your inner compass performing precisely what it was designed for, sensing the vibrations that have been hovering around you longer than you've noticed. And I need you to grasp this absolutely clearly today. You are not insane for sensing unseen eyes. You are not fabricating scenarios. Things have been unfolding in the background. Behind the curtain, honestly, and today we are absolutely going to reveal that truth. Here is the reality that rarely gets discussed. This particular type of pain is the variety where you get abandoned long before you can even figure out your supposed mistake. You offered this individual every genuine part of yourself. You were present. You made an effort. You remained patient. Yet somehow down the line, they forced you to believe your existence was a heavy load rather than a blessing, as if caring entirely too deeply was your personal defect rather than your greatest asset. Consequently, you minimized yourself. You began saying sorry for initiating contact. You began analyzing every single text. You began believing you needed to work for minimal respect from the very person who initially pursued you. That is the fragment that still resides in your bones occasionally, correct? Yes. That exact sting of being forced to feel completely discarded by the singular individual you believed would never, ever put you through that. And you aren't defective for still carrying that weight. You are merely human. You are just a person, truly. And you cared. You deeply loved someone who lacked the capacity to carry the warmth you handed them. That is the irony resting beneath every single emotion you are experiencing at this moment. You surrendered more of your authentic spirit to them than practically anyone else. Yet somehow, you wound up feeling like an outsider inside your own relationship. You began analyzing their moods like checking a storm forecast. You began retreating before the letdown even materialized. You became an expert in a quietness that was never truly directed at you. Yet you were unaware of that fact back then. All you grasped, understood? All you grasped was the deep sorrow of attempting to be perfectly adequate for someone who continually shifted the goalposts further out of reach. So you shouldered that. You bore it silently because speaking the words aloud felt entirely like confessing you lacked the resilience to simply move past it. But here is the truth I need you to deeply internalize right at this second. The desire hasn't abandoned you. It remains present. It is the identical drive that used to grant you the courage to voice your truth, to initiate contact, to express affection openly without flinching. You merely tucked it beneath so much trauma that it began feeling much more secure to desire absolutely nothing. That is not frailty. That is pure survival. And operating in survival mode does not signify that the flame extinguished. It simply means you figured out how to guard it. Now, let us dive further because a core motive exists for why this individual backed away from you directly, and it possesses zero connection to you lacking worth. Consider the specific vibe this individual is accustomed to: turmoil, pursuit, the endless tug of war. The style of attachment where an individual must battle for visibility, must act out to receive affection, must manufacture conflict just to experience reality. That is their comfort zone. That is their baseline. Then you arrived, grounded, authentic, entirely present. And rather than experiencing comfort, it activated an alarm inside them. Because tranquility is deeply alien to individuals who were raised linking affection with constant trials. Your reliability did not register as a safe harbor to them initially. It felt entirely alien. It registered as an exam they had zero clue how to conquer. Therefore, rather than embracing it, they retreated. Rather than having faith in a positive thing, they destroyed it. Because destruction was the primary dialect they had been conversing in their entire existence. And I need you to pause on this thought for a moment, since it will completely shift your perspective on all of it. The specific manner they withdrew from your life possessed zero correlation with your intrinsic worth. It possessed every possible connection to the reality that you were entirely too authentic for a mindset that only understood how to function within constant chaos. You caused them to experience an emotion they lacked the tools to manage. And rather than evolving through that unease, they scurried back to their known environment. Even when that known environment was poisonous, even when their familiar zone was entirely empty, that remains the reality beneath their freezing demeanor. That is the reality beneath their complete silence. It was never a case of your intensity. It was simply that they were completely unaccustomed to anything purely genuine. And here is the absolute climax of this. And I strongly want you to internalize this point. You were absolutely never the flaw within that dynamic. You were, my wonderful friend, simply the reflection. And individuals who have avoided their own internal recovery utterly despise staring into a reflection that displays precisely the massive distance they still need to travel. That is the reason they vanished. That is the reason they turned freezing. That is the reason they left your texts on read after weeks of relentlessly pursuing you initially. It was never a dismissal of your identity. It was a complete evasion of the person they needed to evolve into in order to maintain you. That is the absolute reality. Now, let us inhale deeply for a moment, since I understand that impacts you deeply. When you ultimately realized you were not the broken party, a dynamic inside your spirit changed. You quit lingering beside the screen. You quit rereading past texts, searching for some hidden hint you overlooked. You began taking back fragments of your identity you were unaware you had surrendered. Your affection, your perspectives, your privilege to occupy a room without constantly showing regret for it. That transformation, that silent choice to cease. Minimizing yourself is precisely what ignited the entire reaction occurring on their side right now. Because the second you cease pursuing a person, the second you halt, the moment you cease acting out for their validation, it creates an irony, a profound irony. They sense that shift even from miles away, even without a singular text being exchanged between you two. An irony indeed. Let us discuss the second primary catalyst, since this is exactly where it begins, linking to the hidden reality occurring behind those burner profiles. Observe, this individual constructed their entire ego around remaining the partner who departs first. Precisely. Serving as the uncaring one, serving as the figure who can exit the room without ever glancing over their shoulder. Because that false sense of dominance is the singular barrier preventing their insecurities from devouring them entirely. Yet you refuse to battle to retain them. You refuse to plead. You refuse to manufacture drama. You merely fell silent and released them neatly and absolutely. And that silence resonated far louder than any words you might have yelled in their direction, because for the initial time, for the very first instance, they were not the individual exiting, you were. And that inverted a major component in their entire perception of their own identity. Envision it similar to a deserted conservatory. Imagine this scenario. You utilized months pouring your spirit into that gorgeous environment. You hydrated the greenery, maintained the windows spotlessly, and ensured every single thing thrived. You dedicated your brightness, your effort, your hours, your highly valuable time. However, the proprietor of that soil explicitly signaled that your presence was unwanted. They overlooked the flowers and judged your hard work. Consequently, you executed the most difficult action imaginable. You grabbed your equipment, stepped away, and secured the gate upon your exit. You handed them the exact distance they silently demanded. Right now, they remain positioned outdoors in the freezing chill, comprehending that the sanctuary is withering in your absence, and they are frantically attempting to glance through the icy panes holding a torch. Those burner profiles are just them attempting to observe your progress within your freshly planted garden. This comparison strikes hard since it emphasizes the glaring difference between genuine effort and sheer arrogance. It positions your withdrawal not as a failure, but rather as the extraction of your deeply vital, nurturing force. If they fail to value the brightness you deliver, if they fail to earn the absolute best parts of you, their obsessive monitoring from those phantom accounts is simply their awakening to the fact that they didn't merely misplace a human being. They forfeited the very gardener who rendered their existence vibrant. They wished for your absence right up until you genuinely departed. Here is the visual I need you to mentally grip firmly. Envision them as an individual who has been sipping from the exact same cracked, discolored mug their entire existence, persuaded that is simply how every beverage is supposed to taste. They remained unaware that pure hydration was available until you offered them a brimming vessel, and they grew terrified to consume it. Therefore, they slapped it away from your grasp entirely. And currently, resting in that spot, holding nothing except that familiar damaged mug, they are beginning to recall precisely how incredibly refreshing that pure liquid truly felt. That is the underlying regret they are hauling around. Not simply missing you, but because they ultimately understand how genuine tranquility resonated. And they stand as the sole person responsible for tossing it aside. Let us delve substantially further right now, since a secondary level exists beneath all this behavior. I truly doubt you have allowed your mind to completely examine the fact that several of you weren't merely abandoned. You were manipulated into feeling you needed to battle for standard respect, as if warmth was being heavily restricted, and you were forced to work for every single fragment. And the moment you ultimately quit acting for it, ceased trying out for affection that should have been unconditionally offered, that is exactly when the true mental breakdown began on their side. Because the identity of you that finally stepped back was not resentful. It was devoid of theatrics. It was simply finished. And finished is the most terrifying aura an individual like them can ever encounter, since finished never pleads for a final conversation. Finished requires zero justifications. Finished merely marches onward. And that continuous progression abandoned them, rooted precisely in the spot they perpetually dreaded winding up. Solitary, facing their own reflection. Zero diversions, zero pursuit, zero theatrics to display for any audience. You selected tranquility instead of an act, and it is pushing them to the brink of insanity. And that is precisely when the surveillance began. Not since they abruptly gained reverence for you. Not since they abruptly resolved their internal mess. It commenced because the sheer quietness coming from your direction turned intolerable for an individual who constructed their entire ego around being relentlessly pursued. Therefore, they discovered a loophole past your block button, a fresh login, absolutely zero display photo, typically a handle holding zero significance to your life, tracking you from the darkness since they are incapable of tolerating the mystery of how your existence functions minus their presence. A few among you will probably go inspect right away as you hear these exact words, and I am already aware of the discovery you will make. Some hollow, anonymous, tiny profile that has been silently viewing your daily updates, double-tapping absolutely nothing, leaving zero remarks, merely hovering. That is exactly their doing. That is undeniably them. They are ghosting through your digital presence, since they are entirely incapable of managing the heavy quiet you left in your wake. Phantom accounts operate merely as disguises for individuals entirely too timid to offer a genuine apology. And every anonymous view they generate serves as a monument to the massive territory you currently dominate within their thoughts. Their online creeping remains a blatant admission of their deep remorse. And here is the element that perfectly finishes the puzzle, since this is the exact moment all your chaotic feelings finally snap together logically. The core motive they forced you to feel discarded was never connected to your actual value. Rather, it stemmed entirely from their internal feelings of inadequacy deflected directly upon your shoulders. Deflected? Yes, projected directly onto you. And the actual motive they are monitoring your life via ghost profiles today does not represent affection in any pure capacity. It represents sheer withdrawal. It is the exact reaction when an individual loses their supply of grounding energy they entirely failed to value until the moment it vanished. They are not monitoring your progress since they feel a sense of pride in you. They are monitoring your life since your non-existence is the most deafening noise within their reality currently. And total silence possesses a unique method of compelling individuals to finally listen to their own internal mess. You exited the physical space, yet you remain the absolute singular topic echoing in their mind. They are obsessing over the fact that your non-existence serves as the sole reflection they currently possess to view their true selves accurately. Here is the crucial segment I desperately need you to absorb, since this represents the massive transition. You have already shattered past the former iteration of your identity that required their validation to experience completeness. That breaking point did not signify your termination. It represented the inception, a gorgeous, powerful start. Each instance you observe yourself desiring to verify whether they sent a message, instantly recall this truth. You absolutely do not owe your tranquility to an individual who previously manipulated you into feeling like a heavy load merely for existing authentically. You possess zero obligation to minimize your spirit, to accommodate individuals who persistently refuse to evolve. And that burner profile, that phantom login, that completely fixated surveillance, that does not stand as evidence that you must return to them. That simply stands as confirmation of precisely what your intuition previously guessed. You were absolutely never the flaw. You were the ultimate benchmark, and benchmarks never pursue. They merely require an equal match. They patiently wait to be matched. Let us discuss the upcoming phase right now, since I realize many among you are actively pondering whether this scenario ever transforms into a genuine apology, or whether you are merely expected to tolerate the unease of being monitored by an individual who completely refuses to just present their actual identity boldly. Here is the brutal reality. A fraction of these individuals will ultimately step into the light. They will discard the disguise, initiate contact, delivering a message that appears significantly more mature than the iteration of the person who originally departed. They will desire to justify their actions, seek forgiveness for their harsh quietness, confess they have been monitoring your life from the shadows, confess their internal battles, acknowledge that misplacing your presence compelled them to analyze their own flaws in a manner they spent their entire existence dodging. And should that occur in your reality, you alone hold the power to choose how to handle that interaction. Not driven by duty, not driven by ancient routines, but solely driven by whatever your heart genuinely desires. Once you are planted firmly inside your absolute power rather than your previous anxieties. However, a segment of these individuals will refuse to ever emerge. Human nature rarely shifts that drastically. Several will remain firmly planted in their current hiding spots, circling your orbit from far away, utterly terrified to hazard being dismissed, considering the trauma they inflicted upon your spirit. And here is the core issue. You must absorb this statement completely. That remains entirely outside your jurisdiction to repair. You hold zero obligation to linger in the background questioning whether this current dawn represents the moment they ultimately muster some courage. Your internal recovery was absolutely never designed to rely upon their sluggish schedule. You maintain the right to construct, to fully build an existence, a complete reality packed with vibrant energy that belongs solely to you, entirely irrespective of whether they ever manage to step free from their hidden darkness. Because here is the profound reality beneath the surface truth. The distance you granted their life did not serve as a present designed for their advantage. It served as a protective wall essential for your personal survival. And somewhere within that vast distance, you uncovered the exact treasure they never anticipated you recovering, your own spirit restored. You recovered your true identity once more, the iteration of your soul that chuckles brightly without analyzing whether the volume is excessive, the iteration of your spirit that vocalizes desires boldly rather than silently praying some individual finally pays attention, the iteration of yourself that refuses to offer apologies for occupying space within your personal journey. That exact iteration of your character is precisely the image projecting onto their glowing monitor every single instance they reload that hollow phantom profile. And that remains the exact reason their eyes remain glued to you. Therefore, allow this reality to sink deeply into your bones. You are absolutely not discarded. You were absolutely never unloved. You were merely unappreciated by an individual who lacked the capacity to value anything genuine without instinctively destroying its beauty first. And the massive gap you handed them never acted as a penalty. It represented the most deafening, incredibly dominant action you could have potentially executed, since it compelled their mind to rest inside a quietness they manually manufactured, forcing them to ultimately recognize the ringing echoes of every valuable thing they forfeited. Regardless of what unfolds tomorrow, whether they return visibly transformed or whether they remain permanently concealed behind that cowardly empty handle until the end of time, you have already shattered, broken free from the former version of your heart that demanded their approval to experience inner completeness. And absolutely no action that unfolds on their side of the screen can ever strip that massive victory away from your soul today. The former iteration of you they are actively searching for has ceased to exist entirely. You no longer represent the individual who previously pleaded for a fraction of their focus. You no longer represent the spirit who wept violently over their cold withdrawal. You stand today as an individual fully aware of your own massive value. And possessing that deep certainty is the most highly formidable energy you could ever carry inside any space. So entirely cease searching for their hidden motives and begin channeling your focus toward your present reality. Allow them to stare. Allow them to question everything. Allow them to marinate within the sheer quietness they actively demanded. Because while they remain cowering behind a glowing display, attempting to decipher exactly how you are thriving so magnificently without their presence, you are going to be out in the real world, experiencing an existence so vibrant that they will remain forced to continuously reload their page, merely to snatch a tiny visual of the masterpiece they fumbled. And understand, that is not an act of vengeance. That is merely the organic aftermath of stepping away from an individual who remained entirely clueless on how to cherish your worth. That wraps up our session today.